Tēnā koutou katoa. Hi, my name is Donna Coventry, and I'm the Scholarly Communications Lead with the library at Auckland University of Technology, and I'm on the 2026 Research Support Day Community Organising Committee. I'll be starting and closing each day with a karakia in order to bring us together, so please feel free to read along with me, and the English translation is also provided. So, Pouhihiri, Paurarama, tēnā te pau o te whakaaro nui, o te nākau iti o te aroha, te pau e here nei I a tātou. Mauri ora ki a tātou, haumie, huie, tai kie. And now I'd like to hand you all over to Gabby.
Thanks, Donna. So I'm Gabby Lamb. I'm from Monash University Library. I'm my academic services librarian, and Monash are hosting this year. So the RSC Day Organising Committee acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises the continuing connection to lands, waters and communities. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. So if I may, I might just reiterate the housekeeping tips from yesterday. Sorry if I'm repeating for, someone who's attending both days. But all the program times are Australian Eastern Standard Times. All the sessions are being recorded and they will become available at a later date on our YouTube channel. So we'll let you know through our networks when those videos have been processed and ready to watch. What we'd like you to do is add any questions for the speakers, for the presenters today, to the Q&A function. Chat is for you to chat amongst yourselves, make comments, things like that, but it's better for you to ask the questions in the Q&A so we can effectively manage them. The presenters, just be prepared to be promoted to panelists at your time slot. Emily Hammond, my colleague, will send you a chat and let you know that it's happening. Attendees, you're automatically muted, so do feel free to use chat to communicate. And do provide feedback on our website. We've put a link there to a Google form. We really appreciate your feedback to improve for next year. And most of all, just enjoy today's event. So today's theme is pretty much AI. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Adrian Barnett, who is from the Queensland University of Technology. So Adrian is a professor of statistics who has worked for over 30 years in health and medical research. He works in the emerging field of research on research, or meta-research. He has researched how research is funded and has worked with funding agencies to improve their processes. He also investigates bad practices in published papers, including identifying unreliable and fraudulent papers. So without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Professor Barnett.
Thank you very much. Did I share the right screen? Hopefully, yep.
Yes, you did.
Wonderful. Wonderful to be here. I want to start with a great quote by a journalist from the US, Kathleen Chedraui. She said that AI slop is an oil spill in our digital oceans. And I really like this quote because, kind of like an oil spill, you don't know how far some of this stuff has gone. You don't know how deep it is. Also, like an oil spill, the people who've made all the, have caused all the problems and just walked away from it and are refusing to help. And then also, like an oil spill, when I go in there and try and clean some of this up, it's sort of very time consuming, very manual, hard work. And you see the images of people cleaning one bird and then you turn around and there's a whole other heap of birds that all need to be cleaned. How deep does the AI slop problem go? This is a paper we published just this year in the BMJ, where we tried to find potential paper mill papers. So paper mills are companies that will provide you with a paper for anywhere between sort of $500 and $2,000. The price often ranges depending on what author position you want, and it also goes up by the impact factor. we could see that a lot of these papers had very similar titles, and I'll show you some other examples later on. So we actually used LLM, we actually used AI to try and catch AI, and we found a whole load of papers that were attracted in the cancer literature. Cancer seems to be a particular target, and trained an AI model to recognize these kind of templatey papers. And what you can see from this graph is that sort of from the year 2008, the number of these papers has really been exploding. So we're up to around 30,000 papers that we flagged. Now, our flagging tool is not perfect. It only uses the abstracts and the title. That's the only text we had data available for. So, you know, like a lot of screening tools in health, it isn't perfect, but we're pretty confident in this signal that the amount of these digital oil spills is really rapidly increasing over time. Funny enough, in the last couple of years, it's gone down a bit. We're not sure why. That may be the sort of more sophisticated LLM models that are becoming harder to spot. How much is cleaned up? Well, this is Ivan Aransky, who's been an immense and amazing person in the area of research integrity. If you don't know retraction, which I'm sure you will do, definitely worth having a look. And their weekly reads are one of the best things on the net, I think. Well, you can see the percent of retractions is about 0.01%. So, as Ivan says, retractions are increasing, but not enough. So a retraction is when a paper has been considered bad enough that the journal pulls it from being published. You can see from this graph there was a huge spike in 2022. That was the Hindawi debacle, where Hindawi realised that they'd been overrun with paper mills and compromised peer review, where they had editors on the inside, so that authors could get guaranteed publications publishing almost anything. And you can see in recent years the number of retractions really falls, and that's because, as I'll explain in a minute, it just takes an enormous amount of time to get this stuff retracted. So there does seem to me to be a deliberate go slow policy. You could say that the authors do have the right to reply, and I think that's fine. But here's an example. So this is a trial. I've given the full reference here. It's a randomized pilot study of the efficacy and safety of loading. I should have practiced these medical words before we came up. Some drug in acute ischemic stroke. So this is a paper I'm really concerned about, because one of the tools I made with randomized trials will look at the baseline table in a randomized trial. Where people make up data, they often make up baseline tables that just look too good to be true. The two randomized groups are so similar on age, gender, comorbidities, and this is one of the trials that I flagged. So I flagged it in May 2005, and in April 2006, I get an email from the journal, so more than a year later, saying, thank you for alerting us. We take any issues raised seriously. Well, clearly that's not true, because they've taken more than a month. Now, the reason I found this study is that it's currently in the Australian stroke guidelines. So this is not just some study that's not doing any harm. I'm seriously worried about this study. I think the authors need to explain how their randomized trial works. And we need to get this slop chucked out of the guidelines. Where are the oil spills? Unfortunately, China is spending a lot of money on research, which is fantastic, and wants to be a world leader in this area, but the incentives are all wrong. So China, in the cancer literature, more than 1 in 3 papers show signs of being a paper mill. Things are also bad in Iran and Saudi Arabia. Why does it happen that in China there are some very weird incentives where to get particular medical qualifications, you have to get a paper, and some of these doctors are already working very long hours. We can see the adverts online have been translated, from places like WeChat. So if you're under pressure to get a paper to get the qualification, your colleague spent $1,000 and got a paper and everything went fine, I think it is pretty intensive. And we know in China as well, a lot of universities are under pressure to rise up the league tables, and the Chinese universities are certainly doing that. Pretty funny that in one of the league tables, the institution now that is top in the mathematics ranking doesn't actually have a master. So some of this stuff is being very badly over. Drill, baby, drill seems to be, to continue the oil spill analogy. So these are 9 openly available data sets. So there's MIMIT, which is in CARE, UK Biobank, NHANES, Global Burden of Disease. And what this is my colleague Matt Spick. What they've done is, you can see over time, the blue line, the number of papers in these areas has been increasing. This is sort of natural growth of research. What they've done with the orange line is from sort of 2022 onwards, they've projected that growth forward and what it should look like. And then the blue line is what actually happened. So you can see for NHANES, in 2025, there were over 6,000 papers. So NHANES is a huge dietary study from the US. It's freely available for anybody to use. And what we're almost certain is happening is that there are now robots or just individuals as well, sort of homebrew versus robots, just going in, writing a paper and churning it out and publishing it. And because NHANES has quite a good reputation, because it is good data, a lot of these papers are getting accepted. So this is a sort of explosion in slop. And we can see here's just some examples. I'll only read out the first title. The first title is Associations Between Oxidative Balance Score and Chronic Kidney Disease Events in the US adults, based on a population study. Well, that's NHANES. If I read you out the other titles, you can see that it's almost the same thing. You can see sometimes they change the years. So, that's a little thing you can twiddle to claim that it's new. So you can see that they were all probably all created around the same time in January 2024. So this is when we know the dates when they were submitted to the journal. And then here's the dates when they were accepted. So it really is just this sort of factory of people making the same pretzel over and over again. Sometimes even in, you see this one, I mean, the same journal published 2 basically near identical papers. And the AI now will do everything for you, do the analysis, and do the writing. And we've seen this ourselves. So with Matt Spick, the University of Surrey, there's a new there's a new model from OpenAI called Prism that's actually aimed at academics. And me and Matt went in, we took a data set that nobody had ever used before, and within 30 minutes, with almost no human input, we had a pretty good paper. The sort of paper I'd be very happy to get from a student. So it wasn't revelatory, it wasn't curing cancer, but it was entirely passable. And I think that is an enormous concern. These tools, and this was actually free and easy to use. In a way, there's one funny corollary from this, is that this might actually undermine the business model that paper makes, because I think more and more people are going to start to realise, I don't have to pay $1,000 for a paper mill. I can now do this myself. And then there are others, there's going to be loads of these, but Google made Paper Orchestra. So that produces a submission-ready manuscript with figures and verified citations in about 4 minutes. Now, the way they advertise it is that a researcher can give Paper Orchestra all their background data, all their lab notes, and Paper Orchestra will make the paper from that. So that sounds lovely. I think that is a great idea. But whilst, of course, there's that fantastic use of it, this availability is also there in non-genuine ways, just to get that paper. Data slop is another thing we've looked at. So this is a data set we found on Kaggle. This is from my student Alex Gibson. And if you look at the paper, it says a smart camera located in patients' rooms has been used to collect images. And this was a paper that claimed that it could diagnose stroke from images of patients. When you look at the actual images in the data, we have things like this, a sketch. There's multiple sketches in there. There are proprietary images, this one from Getty, and then a whole load of celebrities. They really liked Sylvester Stallone. A whole bunch of Sylvester Stallone pictures in there. Daniel Craig, who else was in there? Forrest Whitaker. The other disturbing thing that was in there was quite a lot of pictures of children as well, and there's no mention of ethics or permissions at all. There's been about 20 papers published on this data set so far. So once again, this is one of these, like the previous examples I was showing you, this is one of these easily available data sets, so people just grab it, use it. I don't know if they actually look at the data or ask any questions, but they're just really, really happy to get Then the other one we've seen, and again, so this is from a website, a data website called Kaggle. Both of these data sets are from this website called Kaggle. And what this one says, again, this was in stroke. An authoritative data set was used as a research object. When we open the data set, there are 100,000 observations in this data set, this stroke data set. There's almost no missing data. So straight away, that should start to ring alarm bells. And when you just do a simple histogram of BMI, you can see that 30,000 people had the same BMI. I mean, this is just not plausible. This is clearly not real data, and this isn't the only problem in this data set. So there's been, I think, over 100 papers now published using this data set, and still new papers coming out. Only about 7 of them have been retracted so far. I've had some very interesting discussions with some journals about retracting this stuff. And, you know, once it's in the journal, though, some of them will defend it. I had one journal the other day, an MDPI journal called Algorithms, and they defended it by saying, oh, well, our journal title is called Algorithms, and we basically said, you know, this will never be used in clinical practice. We don't have any, it's not going to harm people because our work has nothing to do with clinical practice. As a statistician who's worked my whole life in health, my whole career has been trying to influence and better people's health. So that's just a nonsense. And actually, after a while, I realised that the letters they were writing back to me were generative. So just more bloom and slop that I have to fight. I'm not even willing to have a discussion with them. Human to human. All right, what can we do? It does feel a bit like a game of whack-a-mole. You can change. There's so many perverse incentives in the system. We can fix one thing, and somebody else can find a workaround. I don't think that's an excuse for not doing anything. Doing nothing more. I think one of the biggest things we can do as researchers, and one of the biggest changes we're going to have to get used to, is that we're soon going to all have to leave paper trails, leave little breadcrumbs. So as you're working on your project, as you are a human, you're going to have to leave digital footprints online. The one I think that could be introduced tomorrow, I have no idea why it is secret, is ethics applications. So when you get your ethics application, every institution should have a publicly available database that said, yes, Adrian Barnett was given permission to work on this study at this date. So that then when I go forward in time, I can point back to the ethics application and show that I was actually working. That would seriously undermine the paper auspices model now. They would probably find ways to get around it, but it's very hard to go back in time and create these things. They might end up making these databases that have hundreds of potential hypotheses in them. But, you know, that would make it spottable. Nobody has yet given me a good reason why these applications are under wraps and behind closed doors. The commercial incompetence thing is the only decent argument I've seen. There's a very easy way around that. It goes in the database and it doesn't appear for, say, 2-3 minutes when you're ready to write the paper, so you can still read it. It's not just ethics applications, though, it's all sorts of things. When you're working, maybe people's lab notes will soon have to be submitted to papers, or your code, maybe your data. I am worried that some of these open data sets, as I said before, are going to just get exploited. But anyway, I think this is a big change that's going to have to come. Basically, we need, if you're a genuine researcher, you're going to have to start to think about how you show that you've actually done it, and it's not just something that's been written in hard. We can see some people taking precautions already. So I don't know if you're aware, but Archive is now limiting submissions from computer science. Obviously, computer science people are early adopters of the whole LLM technology, but there's been some really serious problems with slop in that area at the same time. I know there's some computer scientists using it to do really interesting stuff, but unfortunately, people as well, which using it to boost their CV. And now Archive is banning users for a year if they submit any hallucinated references in their articles. And that caused quite a big splash. A lot of people outing themselves as the kind of people who don't check their references, which was kind of funny, some very amusing interactions on LinkedIn. But I think there's just going to be more of this because, you know, these tools are very tempting to use. A lot of people are going to use them. Yeah, the slop is rising. And good on Archive for doing something and reacting pretty quickly. I think we need to spend some money. There is a group called United to Act Against Paper Mills, but I've just taken off. I'll go through this to take a little while. Sorry, there's a point there. This is from their website. So they have an education working group, a stakeholder responsibilities working group, and a funder outreach working group. And the education is about overseeing implementation of existing educational resources. The stakeholder responsibilities working group is going to work with publishers, institutions, researchers, reviewers, and others in preventing paper mill activity. And the funder outreach working group is responsible for engaging with research funders to raise awareness of the threat of paper mills and to advocate for research integrity safeguards. But what's missing here in all this is, well, it's not missing, but publishers is mentioned once. And they've got all these other working groups. They seem to be saying, oh, funders, this is your problem. We should be doing something. I don't think this is true. I mean, it's the publishers that are publishing this stuff. It's the publishers that are making the money from this stuff. So, unfortunately, it feels a bit like United to Act is just a bit of wallpaper, really. Somewhere where they seem to be doing something. But it doesn't really feel like they're taking it seriously. Because on the flip side, they are coining it in. So this is a great paper from Mark Hanson and colleagues in QSS. I'll share my slides so all these things are happening. You can look at the papers. So you can see just over time the amount of special issues. So the red is special issues, and the blue dots are regular issues. So one square is 800 articles. You can see at places like MBPI. The number of special issues has just exploded. And special issues have been done quickly, even less peer review scrutiny. You can see that happened at Hindawi, when it was bad. MBPI, Hindawi was shut down. I can't remember the financial loss. Was it 20 million? I mean, this was a huge financial blow to the industry, and it still don't seem to be that one. Frontiers as well. You can see they're really coining, but even the bigger journals as well, maybe not so much special issues. And they will say, well, this is the natural growth in science, and some of that is true, but it's hard not to think that some of this is just take the APC and run. And I think almost on money for quality control, academia and research is just really weird compared to other industries. So the American Society for Quality Control states that organisations typically spend 10 to 15% of their operating costs on quality costs. So testing for quality. If you think of industries like agriculture, I think in aviation it's way higher. Even computing and software, they spend a lot of money checking what they output, what they're selling to the public. That just doesn't happen in the academic world. People say it's done by peer review. Well, that's a voluntary thing. Peer review is missing a lot of this stuff. Just taking the NHMRC budget as an example, I'm not saying the NHMRC should start spending this money. This is just to give you an example. If we spent 10 to 15% of our costs on quality-related work, that would be 740 million. I think what we actually spend, and this is maybe generous, is about $1 million. So we are way behind, and it's really starting to show everything. And I'm not just picking on the NHMRC or any funder. I mean, the publisher's quite poor, but last year the mega publisher asked for 1.2 billion. It's time, if they want to clean up the stuff, it would be this time that they're making a profit. I've done a couple of things to try, and this is a bit of self-promotion, and yes, it was published in Nature and people had a go at me for that, but would anybody have read it if I'd have published it in the Stats Society magazine? Probably not. So it was deliberately published in Nature just to get some attention for it. So a couple of things I've done recently. My CV now doesn't have any of my journal titles. So I just get sick of people scanning through CVs just to look where, what journal was it published in. So the first thing now in my CV is the title of the paper. And if you want to, if it's interesting to you, click on the title. I've also made a pledge, had a lot of brickbats for this. I'm going to halve my publication output. So while the rest of the world is just producing more, I really am a believer in slow science and doing things slowly, carefully, and really focusing on quality. You'll see a lot of stuff about research quality versus quantity, and universities will often say they do focus on quality, but at the same time they are rewarded for quantity. And these league tables that specifically designed for quantity, whether it's in papers, in papers, or citations. So, can I get enough people to sign up and do this? I don't know. But again, I'm not just going to stand. At the other end, we have I stumbled across this the other day, which I thought was very interesting. So here's a person who, both in their ORCID and in their Google Scholar, has actually gone in and changed their name to their name, and then world's top 2% scientist. I haven't seen anybody else who's done this. If you don't know what world's 2% scientists are, it's done by Stanford. It's another load. It's another load. Meaningless league table nonsense, but it gets a lot of attention. It looks all the high thing. It looks extremely sexist. It's against men who have medical research. So I found that kind of interesting. You can see the pressure that some people are under to big themselves up, say how wonderful they are, rather than relying on how good their work is. And of course, it's been around for a long time. The Piltdown Man fraud, I think, is very interesting. So here he is, Charles Dawson. He claimed he'd found the missing link between apes and humans, conveniently close to his home in Sussex. Just happened to be walking out one day. Sounds ridiculous, but he got away with it. And it was only after his death, 40 years later, that somebody discovered that it was some human bones that he'd stained. I think it was human, orangutan, and chimpanzee. Sort of assembled them together. It's literally massive. Wow. But he worked out well for him. He got the Natural History Museum made him an honorary member and things, and the Geological Society and favored him. So there have, unfortunately, throughout science, there have been people willing to use whatever means necessary to get this prestige. How did I end up here? I am not a sort of wannabe detective or policeman. This is not how I thought my career would pan out. I would probably much rather be running medical trials like I used to. But kind of once you've stumbled along this stuff and once you see it everywhere, and the sort of utter shoulder shrugging and lack of reaction, it's kind of just made me really angry and really passionate about this. Because I think it is an enormous problem. And like I said on that first slide, it really does feel like an oil spill in our digital oceans. And I'm worried about, it's great that we have all this information out there and PubMed and all these awesome sources that you can use to summarize stuff, but I'm worried that any sort of summary in the future is going to start to have this rubbish in it. And then how is that not going to have a good impact there? For people and researchers. What's next? I really don't know. I find predicting anything in this area is incredibly difficult because it's just such a mess. But I do predict more oil spills, unfortunately, because there's just very little action. There's a group of us that sometimes get called sleuths. We get called other names because we upset people. There's only about 50 to 60 of us. Very few of us have any funding. So it does feel like we're completely outnumbered. all very negative. I thought I'd end on a positive. How good was that last week? Hopefully the same again this week. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. That's awesome. Well, we've got an avalanche of questions for you, so we're going to make good use of our time. Let's begin with the first question. Why do you think that cancer is a target for AI slop in particular?
Yeah, good question. We don't know for sure, but it is a prestigious area, so that's part of it. It's also an area where one of the things that paper mills do, and one of the ways we think we might be able to spot paper mill papers, is they create this enormous amount of results. So when people who don't understand that there are things called paper mills, some of them have said, well, I read the paper and it wasn't that good, but they've just done so much work. I felt like it had to get through. So yeah, I think the preclinical area, so you know, studies in rats, studies in cells, is kind of vulnerable to this stuff. When you work with humans, you might have to pre-register the trial and things like this. There are other paper traits. So that could be it. Look, it is a real shame that cancer is a target because obviously, you know, that's one of humanity's biggest challenges. Although one of the funny things we've noticed that's happened is there's a thing called circular RNA. Don't ask me what it is. We actually think most of the papers in the circular RNA sort of subfield of cancer, we think most of them are sort of wholly infected. It's just paper mills talking to paper mills. And of course the way then they give each other these citations, so the citations. Now that's bad in a way, but it's also kind of good. It's kind of like, well, you're in this little spot doing nothing, talking nonsense in an area I don't know. So it's more concerning when they come into other areas where they might start to have more influence.
Yeah. So the next question, are paper mills destined to go out of business if AI can do the same thing for free?
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know if people have heard of Chegg. You know, they were a company that said that they helped students, undergraduate students, write essays. It was a cheating service. You know, they even did an advert here on QT campus. It's so based. Their share price looks like a picture of Mount Everest. It went up and up and up, and then it's gone down and down and down because the kids realise I don't need to pay this company. What we notice is that some of the paper mill, and you can see this on the advert, they're kind of diversifying. They've made a lot of money, and we think some of them have actually sort of reinvested that money wisely in a horrible way. So they now offer other services. They will offer to help you with the journal. They will offer to help you get citations. They will offer to help you if somebody like us raises a complaint. They will offer to help you deal with that. So yeah, I'm hopeful that it will harm their business model, but they've got enough money that some of them may find ways around it.
The next two questions are kind of similar, so I'll ask both. So what are your thoughts about the system that leads to the pressure to publish and then there's subsequent growth in slop? So what actions can we take? Because most of your audience are librarians today. So we're saying what actions can we take in libraries? But the next question sort of reiterates the first. The incentives for researchers are deeply embedded, quantity rather than quality, despite internal conversations that are opposite. So how do we change mindsets across the globe?
Yeah, it's very hard. So one thing I've been thinking about recently, I mean, our model used LLM to catch LLM man. So, you know, we're using a thief to catch a thief. I do wonder, some of the models are actually quite good at reading this, and I do think they are getting better. So one possible way is, what if some of these things were able to rate papers? Now, the important thing for me is they're not going to rate papers on their excellence, because that is fool's errand. I want them to rate papers on their competence, on their completeness. So it doesn't matter if you ran a trial and the drug didn't work. That is not of interest. What is of interest is if you ran a trial well and gave a factual and well backed up answer. So then if you can imagine, we can then let the machines run riot and read everything and store everything. It may be able to sort of flag, and I think people have talked about this, like on food labels where you have low, star rating, not healthy, not good for you. Some papers might be able to flag as that, but we might be able to, I hate to say this, league table, we might be able to make a league table that's actually based on competence and good work. Then the final part of the puzzle is those papers that are competent and well done, if they're the papers that become influential, because again, the machines are going to be summarizing it. They're doing this now, making systematic reviews. If you want to be an influential researcher, maybe in the future, it won't be about getting in Nature and Science. Maybe in the future, if we can make it, write a competent paper and the machines will do the rest for you.
Interesting. Okay, so the next question, this is from Matthew. I've heard AI slop being equated to asbestos in that it'll persist in our infrastructure for years to come unless it gets manually removed. So based on the current trajectory of LLMs, do you feel that we will ever be truly free of the impact of AI slop?
That's another nice analogy. Yeah. No, it's going to be really, because it is really exploding right now. I mean, and maybe I'm, because I look at this stuff every day, I just see it everywhere. I mean, occasionally I like to, it's nice to read something nice, a nice news story about research to make you remember that science is actually wonderful. The best thing that's happened to humanity. But yeah, I agree. The cleanup operation is going to be enormous, potentially.
Yeah.
I've heard of researchers in the US now who, I heard this vicariously, they just do not read anything from China anymore. And I think that's very sad. But that is a heuristic for them that they have now taken, because unfortunately there is just an enormous amount of very poor quality stuff coming through.
Okay, so what does it mean for trust in science when scientists themselves are celebrating the creation of papers with AI and extending this to systematic reviews as well?
Yeah. I mean, reviews, it might be good for reviews. If people use review, I mean, we do have a problem where people don't use reviews enough. They will go off and write something and then only later discover there's already been 40 papers written on this topic and they didn't actually learn anything. Or they make the same mistakes that some of these other people make. Yeah, I don't know. There, I'm a bit conflicted on that. There is a possibility that and I've seen some evidence that it can actually be better at humans at finding literature. And one bad thing about us is we are quite biased. If you're doing a review of an area you're interested in, you might have an idea of what sort of evidence you prefer, where the machines should be less biased. So
yeah. The problem, though, with systematic reviews, it sort of defeats the whole purpose of, being able to replicate it, ensure it's rigorous sort of nature.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the people making the tools to do it would argue that the tools can do all that. But yeah, I mean, we see this in other areas. There is a benefit to the hard work of going through and reading stuff. I mean, I tell all my students, I think reading is a superpower. If you want to know what's going on in your area, go and read a lot of papers, and I still read a lot of papers myself. And
yeah,
it's often one of the nicest things I do. So yeah, we don't want to take away that skill.
No, and as librarians, we want people to read as well. Okay, so the next question, how much of AI slop is malicious to deliberately undermine trust in research? And how much is just laziness or ignorance of risk?
Don't know. Good question. Yeah, not sure. It's kind of hard to uncover the business model. Yeah, I mean, look, some of it is, so say for example, you want to go, you're in Iran or India or China, and you want to get a visa to go and work in a Western country, some of the countries will have, or you have to have published papers to get a visa, to get. So for them, I think they see it as okay, well, I've got to do this. I'll do this now, and then maybe I'll get more serious later on. When people are under pressure, where they've been told, okay, there's going to be a cut to the department, or you're given targets. I suppose it's disappointing that people. Well, there will be a bunch of people that look at that and go, well, I'm not going to do that. But then, of course, they're removed from the system. So yeah, we're selecting for the people who are willing to do this.
So the next two questions are related. So Amy asked, she said that she was curious about how much time you personally have spent on all this whack-a-moling. And she wonders how that compares to the time saved by others using these tools to create papers. And then Taryn reiterated, she said further to Amy's question, how much time is taken by you finding and reporting? Do you have support to do this in your role? Is it all volunteer time?
Yeah, no, it's all volunteer time. So and it is. Yeah, so I will see something bad and I see a lot of bad stuff. I have to make a sort of trade-off of, okay, well, this is going to take me an hour or two. Is this bad enough that it's worth an hour or two of my time? And then certainly we see, like with particular publishers, I'll say Elsevier, like I start to think, they have a very low retraction rate. Is it worth my time? I mean, for that stroke data, that's just so patently ridiculous. Pictures of Sylvester Stallone. So I have gone through and flagged all those, mostly just to see which journals are not going to do anything about it. Because I think if you're not going to do anything about that, then what the hell? Why are you in this business?
And I thought Cochrane has got a new retraction alert tool or something I was reading the other day. But
Yep.
So the next question from Janet. So how do you interpret the data you presented at the start of your presentation showing that Europe, the US and Australia have the least slop compared to other areas of the world? So these areas most certainly are very engaged with AI tools. What factors explain the distribution?
Yeah, good question. So that's percentage-wise. I could show you another percent in absolute numbers, where particularly the US doesn't look as good because they produce a lot of science. Don't know for sure, but I do think it is just going back to the incentives. That in Australia, we are under pressure here. I do feel that pressure. But I think the pressure is next level. And we also suspect that it's become kind of accepted in China, that this is an okay thing to do because people have done it for a long time and not got caught. And, they got promoted. So there does seem to be a culture of acceptance around that we perhaps don't have here. Surely I'm not going to say that it is not happening here, and we have had some enormous scandals here of people making stuff up, and it's probably continuing to happen, I'm sure. So we should definitely remain alert here, but we definitely don't want to. A lot of Australian colleges here, to get a particular qualification, you have to get a paper. And my colleague Paulie Stellick from Griffiths has done a lot of work on this, and they're forced to lead a paper sometimes with no real training. So I'm not saying it might be tempting for some of those people soon to use AI slop. Certainly, I think about half of them reported that they had a very bad experience and didn't enjoy being forced to do a research project. So we do still have some bad incentives here, and we need to keep an eye on it. Sure.
So Julia has just noted that, did you see that Wikipedia has banned AI-generated articles, citing that it violates several core content policies? Do you think this will encourage others to do the same, a bit like Archive?
Yeah, there may be particular journals who decide, and I think there's a news site that we are human only. Yeah, I think if you want, but then, well, the counter argument to that is there are those people who have good ideas, but English isn't their first language, so they might take their good ideas and get it rewritten. So that feels unfair to them.
Yeah. So would moving away from publishing in commercial journals to only publishing in institutional repositories where quality can be better monitored help to take the commercialization out of the process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so we started a new, it's not a journal, it's a platform. So in my field of meta research on research, we now have a platform. And what we do there is we peer review preprints. So you can submit preprint to any, OSF, archive, wherever you want. You let us know that it's there. We peer review the preprint, and then we publish the reviews and a version of the paper on our website. So it looks like a journal, but it's not a journal. There's no costs, and that peer review remains open and can be reused. So yeah, I think preprints are an amazing way to undermine this business model, and I love preprints. I know people have published absolute bunkum preprints that have done some harm, but people have also done that with peer review papers. So, and the example is the recovery trial during COVID that was published as a preprint. It was only about a month before it then became a published paper in the New England Journal. But even in that month, I can't remember now the calculation of the amount of lives that it saved, but it was a well-designed study with a pre-published protocol that doctors, as soon as you finished reading that preprint, you knew what drug to prescribe at the end. So people's lives were saved by that being openly available. Now that is a dramatic example, but yeah, let's get the information out there. I'm huge believer in preprints. Nothing bad has ever happened to me from preprints.
Well, so let's just finish off with a couple of sort of quicker questions. So, Tara asks, do you have a process that you follow that others keen to volunteer could use to help?
I don't, but there are some guidelines. So Elizabeth Bick, she does a lot of amazing work where you can look at these cell images, and she's brilliant. She's a basic scientist. She can see what people have copied cells. And she has brought down some pretty big names, the head of Stanford Medical School. It was called and some other people. She's got some guidelines, and I think also the COSIG, COSIG. I'm not sure I can post everybody. I did post it into the slides as well. COSIG, which is an acronym I can't remember, but they have some guidelines on what to do. The other thing, I think if you're in Australia, I would definitely look out for AMOS. That's the Association for Interdisciplinary Meta Research and Open Science. They are a great society, and their conference is really good. And it's only $10, I think, to join. 2 years, so join that.
So let's just end in a funny kind of way. Someone just said, is science doomed? Not quite, we hope. So, and this is a bit controversial, how much of the AI slop is published by MDPI, Frontiers, etc., versus Elsevier, Springer, etc.?
Yeah, I don't know about doomed, but it does feel like the biggest challenge we've ever had, for sure.
But I mean, are you looking at patterns of particular publishers like Frontiers and MDPI who are publishing the slot as opposed to Elsevier and Springer and such?
Yeah, people have done. There's been papers published on this. Yeah, like how often publishers retract, and that's where I remember that Elsevier had by far the lowest. Yeah, how publishers react to this. Yeah, tells me a lot about that publisher.
Well, There are a couple of questions left. One of them I couldn't quite make out, but if you're happy to, you could answer the questions just by typing an answer. But I want to thank you for your presentation. I want to thank you for answering all our questions. And just thanks so much for participating. And I'll introduce the lightning speakers next. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you.
Okay, so next up we've got Anna, Sarah, and Ari, who are collaborating to present Copyright in the Age of Generative AI Challenges in Providing Guidance to Researchers. So take it away, guys.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute myself. And can you see me? No?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to everyone for joining us today on the topic of copyright in the age of generative AI. And my name is Anna. I'm the copyright lead at UTS, and I'm also joined by my copyright colleagues, Ari from UNSW and Sarah from the University of Sydney. So before we get started, you'll see this Menti link and the code on the screen. Just please jump in when you can. We'll just be using it, using a quick activity just in a moment. So it's just great to have it open and ready to go. So in today's three-part session, I'll start by outlining the current Australian copyright and GenAI landscape and explaining why practical risk-based guidance is needed. I'll then pass on to Ari, who will share practical examples and a simple framework for assessing copyright and generative AI questions. And then Sarah will then outline good practice guidance to help researchers make informed, responsible choices. Go to the next screen. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which our campuses are located. We recognise the significant role that past and future elders play in the life of the university and our surrounding communities, and acknowledge them as the custodians of knowledge for this land. We invite others to take a moment to reflect on, and if they wish, share the country that they are joining us from today. So, yes, okay. So before we get into those details, I'd love to get a sense of what's on your mind when you think about copyright and generative AI. So we'll just do this in a word cloud. The question, oh, people are jumping in. Oh, I love the first one, nightmare. When you hear Gen AI and copyright together, what's the first word that comes to mind? Oh, lots of things are coming in. I see no one hesitated. This is great. Yes, risk, confusion, complicated, there's sort of theft, all these things are sort of jumping out. There seems to be pretty much the same sort of theme, right? You know, and these responses really mirror the kind of conversation we're all having with researchers and the support staff right now. People want to use these tools, but they're unsure where the boundaries are. And honestly, that's completely understandable, given how quickly this space is moving. So with that in mind, let's start by looking at where things currently stand in Australia, because understanding the landscape is a first step to navigating your way, navigating your use of generative AI more confidently. So, oh, look at that. Oh. Okay, so as we all know, generative AI has become a regular part of research. People are using it for tasks like literature reviews and data analysis, but copyright law hasn't kept pace with its rapid adoption. Now, depending on what your desired output is, sometimes you need to share copyright material with a generative AI tool. That leaves researchers trying to navigate a pretty unsettled landscape. Whilst it's legal to develop and use AI tools in Australia, there is no dedicated AI Act and no standalone copyright legislation covering AI. The government has also recently ruled out introducing a text and data mining exception, which has pretty much created a divide reaction across the sector. Instead, policy attention is shifting towards a collective licensing and remuneration models. And these are the systems where creators are paid through a centralised organisation like the Copyright Agency that license users of their work on their behalf. And in the meantime, there's ongoing uncertainty about how our existing copyright law apply to AI. So what does this all mean? For now, we need to rely on our current licenses and copyright exceptions that guide our decisions. For researchers in Australia, fair dealing is usually the main copyright exception they can rely on. But it's worth pointing out that fair dealing is not the same as fair use. In Australia, fair dealing only allows you to use a limited amount of copyright material for specific prescribed purposes, such as a research or study or criticism review. If your use doesn't fit one of these purposes, the exception doesn't apply. In contrast, the US fair use is more flexible. It doesn't limit you to those set of prescribed purposes. Instead, it just looks at whether the use is fair overall, which can cover a much broader range of activities. This difference becomes important in an AI context when you're using copyright material to train or develop tools, and it may be easy to argue under the fair use, but it's often more limited or uncertain under fair dealing. But there's also another layer to this. Many of the resources researchers rely on, the journal, article, database, subscription platforms, they're governed by license agreements, and those license terms can actually be more restricted than the law itself. So even if something might technically fall under a copyright exception, the license could still prohibit things like uploading content into AI tools. That means the first question to ask is often not, does fair dealing apply, but is, does the license actually allow for it? So how do you navigate that in practice? In short, the answer depends on what your intended purpose, what materials you're using, and what tools. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ari, who will walk us through how this plays out in practice. Over to you, Ari.
Great, thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm Ari. I'm the Copyright and Library Compliance Officer at UNSW. So can we get to the next slide, please?
Oh, sorry.
And next slide, please. Thanks. So when it comes to copyright and AI questions from researchers, as Anna mentioned, generally the main things to look out for are what material do you want to use? Is it protected by IP or is it ICIP material? So for IP protected material, think about IP more broadly. Copyright is one type of IP. There are other types of IP protection to consider, for example, trademark protection. For ICIP material, we generally suggest not using this with AI, but if your research contains ICIP, you can refer to your local ICIP protocol, the protocol by Creative Australia, or if your research is funded, the funding body may refer you to an ICIP protocol or have guidelines available. Similarly, for sensitive or commercially sensitive information, avoid using this with AI, even an AI tool with enterprise-grade security. So this talk focuses on a copyright perspective, and copyright protected material can include, but is not limited to, journal articles, books, reports, maps, images, figures, tables of data, so data expressed with human authorship, website content, sound recordings, and AV material. You'll need to check whether you have permission or license to use the material with AI. You may have permission to use certain IP protected materials, for example, electronic resources that you can access via a library database, but this does not automatically cover using these electronic resources with an AI tool. You can only use material with an AI tool if the permission or license terms allow you to do so. Note that some terms may allow you to input copyright material into an AI tool, but only if the material will not be used to train the AI model. And some vendors will use improving the model or technology or service to mean training the model. Consider which AI tool you want to use. Be aware of where the material is going and of what material the AI tool has been or is being trained on. How will the information you input be used, and could your input be included in the outputs the AI tool provides to other users? There are copyright considerations for both the AI input and the AI output. Think about the input. If a library subscribed e-journal prohibits use with AI, the AI tool can't access the e-journal because it's behind a paywall. If you provide the AI tool with access to the e-journal via your login to the library subscribed e-journal, there'll be a breach of license. Think about the output. If you're using a library subscribed database with license terms that permit use only with the university endorsed and provided AI tool with enterprise grade security, the library database is under an education license. You may not be able to reuse the AI output containing a substantial portion of or derivative of the source material in your conference presentation that will be made public or in your publication under the education use only terms of that library database. you'll need to check the terms of the library to see what is permitted. Generally, you would need to obtain permission for reuse of a substantial portion of copyright material in your conference presentation or publication. You can consider the context for use. You may have permission to use certain university IP with AI tools provided by that university with enterprise-grade protection, but you may not be able to use university IP with other AI tools. And there may be AI guidelines or policy to consider for AI use. For example, a news outlet may not allow any AI use at all for articles submitted, or a journal may allow AI assistance in articles with disclosure requirements. Next slide, please. Now let's look at two examples in a bit more detail. Example 1, a HDR candidate wants to use GenAI tools to help rephrase sections of their thesis and to generate some images. Issues to consider include, are there any relevant policy documents or guidance, or are there conditions for use of AI assistance with a thesis at the university? Are there any disclosure or record keeping requirements, and how do you actually disclose AI assistance? And if planning to publish the thesis or parts of it in other outlets, you would also need to be aware that different publishers and journals will have their own policy and requirements around AI use, which you'd need to look at. Some practical guidance. If the intended use is an accepted use at the university, keep a record of which AI tool has been used and for what purpose. Be careful to use an AI tool with data security. Don't assume that AI vendors will act responsibly to secure and protect your data or personal information. Check if there is a disclosure requirement at the university for AI use with a thesis and how to disclose AI use. It might be disclosed by you referencing the AI use, and you'll need to refer to your referencing style guide for how to cite AI use. Do not use the AI deliberately to attempt to imitate the material of others, for example, an artist for the images, and think ahead. Could this thesis or chapter become a publication later on? And what do potential publishers' AI policies look like? Next slide, please. Example 2. A researcher has built a text analysis tool which runs locally on their computer. They have access to print copies of a complete corpus of Old French law and want to scan these to use with the tool. The underlying work is in the public domain. The editions they want to digitize and upload to the tool are in copyright and include editorial contributions such as footnotes and abbreviations. Issues to consider include, while the underlying source material is out of copyright, the modern published edition contains copyright-protected editorial material throughout, and that material cannot be easily separated from the underlying work. Scanning the full editions and using it in this way involves reproducing copyright material without permission. Reproducing copyright material in a private environment does not remove the copyright issue. Additionally, there is a copyright issue with reusing the digitized editions in the text analysis tool and if the copyright material is translated. Fair dealing will not apply. More than a reasonable portion would be reproduced. So some practical guidance. There's no provision in the Copyright Act to cover this use. You can either seek permission from the rights holder to reuse the editions in this way, or find an alternative public domain version of the underlying work to use instead. And now I'll hand this over to Sarah, who will expand on the things to look out for, and will cover risk management and good practice principles.
Thanks, Ari. So I'm Sarah Powell. I'm the Copyright Manager at the University of Sydney, and I'm just going to summarise Ari's guidance on good practice in relation to copyright and generative AI and things that you might want to consider when you're supporting researchers. Next slide, please. So it's really important to start with the end goal. So if you understand the end goal on how the researcher's wanting to use the AI tool to assist their research and any goals that they might have for the final research output. The advice that you give to the researcher may change depending on whether the researcher is wanting to use the tool simply to summarize articles or help draft sections of their thesis, or publish in an open journal, analyze sensitive interview data, or do something further advanced with the data. Next slide, please. So these are just some suggested good practice principles that we've put together and how the researcher, to help you start thinking about how the researcher may be using generative AI tools. So the first one is know the source material. Is the material open access? Is it licensed with a Creative Commons license? Is it subscription only? Is it unpublished, confidential, or is it researcher owned? Know the tool environment. Are they wanting to use a public, enterprise, or local model, or a discipline-specific platform? It's important to also check license and policy restrictions, as we've already touched on, especially library databases, publisher terms, any funder requirements, and also your institutional guidance as well. Next slide, please. Minimize risk where possible. So don't upload full copyrighted or sensitive material unless clearly permitted. Keep a really good record of what tool was used, how, and for what purpose. You might need this later down the track. And be transparent. So check whether disclosure is needed for your thesis, your data sets, publications, or your funding compliance. You may be asked to provide the underlying data set for a publication further down. So it's really good to have that information recorded and then also be transparent about what you have used. And think beyond copyright. So consider privacy, confidentiality, research integrity, and any other IP protection as well. So we've just got some questions for researchers that they might want to consider when you're discussing this at that first initial level. So asking the researcher what their end goal is, how they want, what do they want the AI tool to do, what material they're putting into it, do they have permission to use material in that way, can they get permission, is the tool approved or appropriate for the content, will they need to disclose the use later on, and are there any safer alternatives such as public domain or possibly using a closed enterprise system. Next slide, Anna. And just to wrap up our very quick presentation, we wanted to highlight that the law and policy around AI and copyright are very much still evolving. And we know that researchers often want a clear yes or no answer, and this is hard to give. Every institution will have a different risk tolerance, and they'll be governed by their own approaches. So the information shared today is meant to be used as a starting point and for guidance only. And we encourage you to check your institutional policies and agreements around the use of generative AI tools. So thank you for your time, and now we can open it up to any questions.
Thanks, guys. I will, we do want to have a 10-minute break in a minute, but there's, I'll take one question from Wayne, and then I might get either of you to answer the other two just by typing. So Wayne is saying that given the fact that the law is very unsettled and there's no fair dealing provision for training, any thoughts about the way CC licenses requirement to acknowledge the creator interacts with LLM? Any of you can answer. Anna?
Anna or Ari, do you want to answer this one?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get, oh, did it come on? Sorry, I was just fiddling around. Sorry, Sarah, did you want to answer that? Because I'm just, can you repeat the question again? Sorry, because I was just fiddling around with my thing. So
yeah, no problem.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. So given the fact that the law is very unsettled and there's no fair dealing provision for training, you know, training on data.
Yep.
Any thoughts about the way CC licenses requirement to acknowledge the creator in a work interacts with the LLMs?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know if I really have an answer to it because I don't know what models people are using and whether it actually then provides that citation in the output. Do you know what I mean? Like I've worked with some where some will actually provide that citation and where it's come from. But if it doesn't do that, then it's really difficult to say how that's going to work with the AI tools. So
yeah, I think it's tricky because if you produce something, put a CC license on it, you're pretty much saying everyone can use this, you know, depending whether you make no
Yeah.
derivatives or whatever. But because some of the material has been generated by an LLM, then really, can you whack a CC license on it? I think that's what Wayne. I hope
Yeah.
that is what Wayne's getting at.
Yeah, look, I agree. Like I was thinking of mainly if you were to individually input in, but yeah, but when you've got the database, I don't think I haven't come across any that actually. Oh, actually, no, I think I have that where they make show where it's come from, not necessarily use the attribution
Yeah.
license attached to it. So
I think, like Wayne said, it's just murky.
it is very, very murky. Everything with AI.
Thanks so much. We're going to go for a break because some people are just, you know, gagging. So there are two questions, one for Anna and one for Ari. Thanks so much for the lightning talks. And we'll go for a break. Anna will put up the slide. Sorry, Anna Stokes will put up the slide. And we'll see you back in 10. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your 10-minute break. So my name is Ria Hamblett, and I'm the Senior Specialist Data Librarian at UTS Library, and I'm joining you today from Eora country. So we're about to move into our next lot of presentations, which is we're continuing on the AI theme, and we're going to be exploring different perspectives on how this is shaping research practice, policy, and our everyday work. So we're going to hear 3 talks in this block. Each one will be 15 minutes, and each one will then be followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. So remember to get your questions in the Q&A box. So our first speaker today this afternoon is Alissa Hackett from the Auckland University of Technology, and I'm going to throw it straight over to you, Alissa. Thank you for joining us.
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou. Just give me a second to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. All right, e te whānau. So, kia ora. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be sharing with you the results of an experiment that I conducted with multiple groups looking at investigating digital colonialization in generative AI tools. But first, before we get onto all that, I need to tell you, who am I? What am I doing up here? So, ko waio. Ko maunga tautari, ko tararua o ku maunga, ko rangatike, ko ohau o ku awa, ko Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga, ko Ngāti Tūkorohe ngā iwi. E tupu aki a hau I whanganui, ki raro I te tau marumaru o Ruapehu, me te korowai o Pihanga, ko Alissa Hackett tōku ingoa. So, just introducing myself. My mountains are Maunga Tautari and Tararua. My rivers are Rangatike and Ohau. My iwi, my tribes, are Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga and Ngāti Tūkorohe. I grew up in Whanganui under the protection of Mount Ruapehu and the cloak of Mount Pihanga. My name's Alissa Hackett. I'm the Māori Research Services Librarian at AUT, and part of my role is to provide an Indigenous lens on research issues. And to do that, well, I ran this experiment. But first, I am going to start a little to the left. We know this game, right? I think most of us have played this. In chat, I would like you to share, what do you call this game? Now, I'm not just asking randomly. Turns out the name of this hand game, it's an example of local knowledge. It's strongly tied to where you grew up or where you learned it. Not just countries or the cities, but sometimes even the school that you went to determines your default rules. Not something that you notice if you are part of the default or the majority of the people around you, but if you're one of the minority, it's fairly obvious. And I'm just watching chat right now, and we have got a lot of different options, which is really cool to see. So yeah, what is the name of this game? Well, if you look at the English Wikipedia page, it calls it rock, paper, scissors. Treats that as the default name, and it describes the players throwing on the count of 4, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. It's not how I learned it growing up. In Aotearoa in New Zealand, based on the social media discussions I've dug up, most of Aotearoa defaults to paper, scissors, rock, throwing on rock. We've got a decently sized group that does use rock, paper, scissors, and not to dox anyone, there is a small but vocal population who go by Gangangamore, which seems to be tied to West Auckland. So, you know, yeah. But I mean, Wikipedia at least does mention many of these other names, although I see quite a few that you guys have mentioned that aren't on Wikipedia. When I asked AI tools, every single one of them defaulted to rock, paper, scissors. Half of them did not give any other names. The other half mostly mentioned Rochambeau, Jankenpon, which is US and Japanese respectively. Only one Gemini model actually mentioned paper, scissors, rock that I'm familiar with, and the other one insisted that New Zealand uses rock, paper, scissors. So as you can see, this is a lot of variations, a lot of examples, but we are seeing a default version that's coming through. Now, obviously, rock, paper, scissors is not particularly high stakes, but it really does highlight that defaultism that is especially prominent with AI tools. So at least, to me in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the majority of these tools are built overseas, trained on international data, and they're expected to give a single, confident and correct response. It's the way to do the task. And that need for consensus often leads to a flattening of context and nuance. I'm going to be very blunt. This is colonisation. It's in the form of soft cultural power rather than hard military power, but it's where our local experiences are adapted and replaced by the perspective of the majority. These days, often US centrism. Now, what prompted me to give this talk is because I got very frustrated that most conversations around thinking critically about AI all talk about hallucinations. They talk about verifying the information elsewhere, as if there actually is a single true answer. That's rarely the case in real life, but especially when we look at Indigenous knowledge, which is knowledge that has strong ties to place, to people, to non-Western worldviews. And so I'm going to ask, and we're going to see some answers. But what happens when this knowledge is taken from us, when it's regurgitated without context, and why does it matter whose truth is told? So for this experiment, I've run it twice with fairly large groups. You are welcome to try this yourself. There was a link in the chat earlier, and we'll add it again at the end so that you can add your results to my particular data collection. But essentially, I ran this. I got participants to pick any AI tool of their choice and to give it one of these prompts or something very similar. What's the legend of Mount Taranaki? What's the pūrākau about Taranaki maunga? Hea ha ngā kōrero tuku iho o te haerenga o te maunga o Taranaki. 3 prompts, roughly the same questions. Oh, and apologies, I will occasionally dip into te reo Māori. I will do my best to catch myself and provide translations where possible. If I miss out, please, someone do post in chat. Ka pai? That means all good, by the way. So yes. Now, I'm assuming that most of you have not heard this particular pūrākau or narrative before, so I'm just going to give you the context, the broad strokes. So, I've provided a map on screen so you can see some of the key players, so you can see the geography. At Taranaki, it's a volcano that sits on the west coast of the North Island. But as the story goes, once upon a time, he actually resided in the central North Island, amongst many of the other volcanoes. And so it goes, there was a bit of a quarrel over the sole female mountain. Taranaki was defeated. He fled along the path of the Whanganui River, down to where I grew up, and then went up the coast, before he finally settled near the Pouakai Ranges in what's now known as Taranaki District. So this main narrative is consistent across many iwi and tribes, many speakers, although the details can change. And it's really important to note that not all variations come from Māori. So some of the stories are actually composites created by non-Māori ethnographers who often try to attempt to create a single unified narrative for easier consumption by other non-Māori. Not a bit unlike AI, right? So the issue with these composites is that they can misrepresent cultural understandings woven into the narrative or erase them entirely to fit an outsider lens. So for starters, in Te Ao Māori, mountains are tapu or they're sacred because they're our ancestors, our tupuna. And so each iwi or each hapu, each tribe, traces their ancestry to specific mountains. And so we often give the names of our mountains before we share our own names, as I did in the beginning. Therefore, when we have these stories, these narratives about our mountains, it not only reflects our understanding of the geographical landscape, but it also reflects our societal norms and our tribal histories. So a lot of the information I'm sharing today, I found online, verified through a lot of reputable iwi sources or through academic sources. One of those was a really fascinating thesis that suggests that this tale of Mount Taranaki was actually a mythologized retelling of the migration of the human ancestor, Rua Taranaki, who gave his name to the mountain. So that's the story. That's a little bit of the context. I ran a few polls after this to try and capture some of the key details that we might be looking for in AI outputs to see who's getting what story. I'm going to share with you the results of those polls. And for the record, although I have a great fondness for Ruapehu and Pihanga, because these are the mountains of my childhood, I whakapapa to Maunga Tautari, Tararua. Those are my ancestors. And so I'm not actually here to argue that one narrative is more correct. And I'm also not an iwi researcher or mātauranga expert, so you're welcome to disagree with me. Ka pai? All good? Right. So here's the first question I asked, and it was really simple. Based on your AI output, what was the name of the female mountain in the story? Now, most versions will name Pihanga, which is the mountain pictured on the slide. It's understandable. She's got those gorgeous gentle curves, she's covered in greenery. There is a bit of erosion near her peak, which does look a lot like a vulva, so you can understand why often she is the female. But there are some versions that may name another mountain. So out of 54 responses, they got 1 vote for Ruapehu. And actually, that was the version that I learned in school growing up. Possibly comes from ngā mahanga iwi in Taranaki region. While researching this particular narrative, I saw 1 reference to Tongariro as the female mountain. Coincidentally, we also got 1 vote in the poll. And there is 1 vote for Taranaki. I know that this is my mate Steph, who comes from South Taranaki region. Her iwi refers to Mount Taranaki as a she, and I know that she actually growled at her AI tool for, not getting that right. So far, these results sort of represent what I might see when I'm doing the research, although I expected Ruapehu to have a larger contingent. But, this doesn't mean much. If we got a vote for another name, it suggested we might be getting a different version from everyone else, but it wasn't a red flag. Here's where things start to get a bit interesting. What is the relationship between the mountains? Because most AI tools do not give any relationship. This particular question was not mutually exclusive. So for instance, if the mountains are a family, especially a family of brothers, that by implication means that they are in fact part of a clan, a tribe, an iwi. So it was possible to pick multiple answers here. But the thing that sort of ticks me off when it doesn't imply a relationship, these relationships underline our understanding of the Maunga as living ancestors. And they give us a framework for how this narrative might be used within the iwi for a bit of a kōrero, a bit of a talk about the tension between personal desire and maintaining social harmony. If we do happen to specify that they're specifically a clan of chiefs or a kāhui, it not only reinforces the idea that these are revered ancestors, but also that they are well-versed in tikanga, which is the correct way to act. And therefore, we tell the story because it has something to say about tikanga, how we should be acting. If you happen to get a version that actually has specific roles for each maunga, which is quite common in the Ruapehu version, which is quite common in the Whanganui version, from the Whanganui iwi, you do get a bit of a glimpse into iwi social dynamics as well. So when we see that most of the responses don't provide any relationship, it really divorces this narrative from the cultural context. Here's one which is, I expect, quite a bit of diversity in the results, because the answer to this question, which mountains fought in the battle, it depends on where you come from as to who you might hear. So, as expected, the 2 main maunga, Taranaki and Tongariro, both about 40 responses each. We do see a reasonably large amount for Ruapehu, which is the largest mountain in the region. He doesn't always participate in the battle though, possibly because he's still in the Central Plateau. And similar for Ngāruhoi, he's also often left out altogether. Now, if you are a bit if you're a bit further north, you might actually see other maunga coming in. Tauhara, who, if he loses the battle, only goes as far as the opposite side of Lake Taupo. You might see Putawaki, which are the two next most common. Sometimes you see Tarawera and Whakaari White Island, which they have their own separate traveling mountain narrative. And so if they turn up, it could be local iwi knowledge, or it could be a bit of that conflation between the two myths. Okay? One final question, and this is the moral implications of the narrative. It's also where my Mentimeter crashed during the last session, so there's probably a joke there about modern tech companies and morals. But I find it really interesting that the modern retellings always seem to default to the desired by other mountains motive. Pihanga was an object of desire and therefore they naturally fought. It's not entirely inaccurate. We do have well-known whakatauki about men going to war for women, but the passiveness of the framing kind of feels like a rewrite. No one's at fault, no one can be offended, there are no lessons to learn. The other fairly large group is that Pihanga was married to Tongariro, but was wooed by Taranaki, and that's what I sort of see quite commonly as well. That's sort of the most common version that I've seen in the original references. It sort of gives us a lesson about perhaps staying faithful to your partner or not making moves on someone else's spouse. And it's really important to know that in the Taranaki region, they often make it very clear that Taranaki, the mountain, was acting inappropriately. Normally, you'd expect to talk up your ancestors, so this sort of humbleness underscores that it is a moral lesson. And a side note, some narratives get really, really explicit, but we can't talk about that in polite society. That's why they often say desire, because sex was not a taboo in traditional Māori societies, but we've got legacies of Christian colonization, eh? Interestingly, there are three main, aside from the more explicit version of the married to Tongariro, there are two other versions. None of these turned up in the particular AI outputs. Pihanga refusing to choose between her suitors, which gives us morals about indecision, about being able to pick a proper social partner to keep the peace. Or the other version, where Ruapehu is married to Taranaki, but was actually stolen away by Tongariro. And I think the moral of that story is sometimes the people that you love are torn away from you. And it's really comforting to know that someone else understands that grief and was able to move on. All right, so where to from here? You've got a taste of this sort of narrative. I suggest trying it yourself with something that you know quite well about. Seeing what perspectives are highlighted, what assumptions are made, what perspectives are downplayed or completely lost. After that, look for other Indigenous voices in the AI sphere because there are some absolutely fascinating discussions about the tension between ensuring our knowledge is fully represented and also making sure that we're not losing sovereignty, we're not handing all this data and this knowledge over to these international corporations for no benefit. As for me, I will be, hopefully, you'll be able to add some data to my collection and I can come back perhaps next year and share with you whether these results have changed at all. So with that, thank you all. I'm sorry I've gone over time and I don't think I have time for questions, but I thank you very much. Ka nui te mihi ki a koutou.
Oh, kia ora, Alissa. Thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. And I think there is a link in the chat for people to get involved. Someone might want to promote that link again now that she's finished. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. I'm going to get you to answer. There's three questions. I'm going to ask you to answer two of them via typing the answer. I'm just going to ask one live, which was, have you created a list of models that may be preferable to others based on your experiments?
I have not been recording the models. Aroha mai. That is my bad. Most people do not actually know what model they're after. What I would say, I know there are a lot of Indigenous and iwi-led models that are being developed out there. If you can use those for Indigenous or Māori topics, please do. So aroha mai, I can't say this tool is better.
Very cool. Okay, no, that's fair enough. So just in order to keep to time, I might just ask you to answer those other two questions via the chat, and they'll appear once she's done that. But thank you very much, Alissa.
Got it.
So we're going to move to our next speakers now, and that is Fiona Russell and Kat Kane from Deakin University. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. And I will just share my screen. And there's always technical hitches, aren't there, when we're trying to juggle our different screens. Let me just stop sharing and I'll restart so I get everything on the right order. Okay, there we go. Okay, so yeah, again, thank you, Ria, and hello, everyone. And I'd just like to say what interesting presentations we've had today. I've just been just so engaged and just amazing work that's been going on, and amazing work by librarians and library people. Today we're going to talk about library guidance for researchers in AI environments. I'm Fiona Russell, and I'm Expert Searching and Consulting Services Lead at Deakin, as well as co-lead of the Library AI Lab, together with my colleague and co-creator, Kat Kane. Kat is lead outreach and engagement, as well as co-lead of the lab. We are considering a dual approach to this topic. Principled, because AI use in research touches on integrity, transparency, and responsibility. Practical, because researchers are already making decisions about these tools in real work. This is not a talk about AI tools in the abstract. It is about what library support looks like when AI is starting to sit inside research, literature review, and tool assessment. The important starting point is that AI is not sitting neatly off to the side of research practice. Researchers are encountering it inside familiar activities throughout the research lifecycle, generating ideas, searching for information, reviewing literature, drafting, coding, translating, creating, and analysing data. Some of that creates useful possibilities, some of it creates new uncertainties. That matters because a support question is no longer only what does this tool do, it is what happens to research in practice when these tools sit inside the work. Imagine you're a researcher. You're time poor, you're curious about AI, you want to be more efficient. You have heard that it might help with a range of research activity, but it's more than that. You both don't want to be left behind in research practice, and you're also anxious because you're not sure of what is available, what is appropriate, what is safe to use, or what your discipline would accept. You are scared of breaking rules, whether that's research codes or institutional policies. So you come to the library and ask the very practical question, what tool should I use? That question makes complete sense, but for us, it's just the start of the conversation, not the whole conversation. The tool question is the doorway. It gets us into the conversation, but it's rarely the whole support needed. Underneath it are questions about integrity, about appropriateness, trust, privacy, transparency, and responsibility. The answer changes depending on the research task, the method, the stage of the project, the kind of data involved, the intended output, and the level of risk. The work is not to just hand over a tool name. The work is to help researchers understand what kind of decision they are actually making. This is where library expertise becomes useful, not because libraries have a magic answer to every AI question, and not because we need to know every tool. Our role builds from existing strengths. We understand searching and discovery, how information is found, ranked, missed, scoped, and documented. We support source evaluation, authority, provenance, coverage, bias, and limitation. We work in information appraisal, quality, context, uncertainty, and evidence value. We also build researcher capability so people can apply those practices beyond one question or one appointment. In AI environments, those areas of expertise combine in very practical ways. Before we go further, it is worth pausing on the two words of our talk subtitle, principled and practical. Principled guidance matters because AI use in research raises complex questions about integrity and responsible use, rigor, transparency, respect, and accountability. The Australian Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research. Need I say more? Principles shape research. Practical guidance matters because researchers are not making these decisions in a vacuum. They are doing real work under time pressure with real research tasks and real uncertainty. So our support has to connect principles to practice. It has to help researchers ask, what is the task? What can the tool actually do? What needs checking and what should be documented? There is a real tension here, and we should be honest about both sides. AI can be useful. It can support early exploration, generate search terms, compare language, summarize information for orientation, assist with drafting content, or reduce some repetitive work. But overclaiming is a problem. A fluent answer is not the same as a reliable answer. Something that looks plausible is not automatically transparent, complete, or methodologically sound. The question is not, can AI ever help? Because clearly it can. A more realistic framing is that many questions need to be asked. What exactly is AI helping with? What are the risks and limitations? What claims are being made? What human checking is required? And most importantly, our researchers should be asking, where do I, as a human researcher, need to stay actively in the work? Search, reviews, and evidence context make this concrete. Search is not just finding some things that look relevant. In research contexts, search can involve scope, strategy, transparency, documentation, and reproducibility. A literature review is not just a narrative. It's not simply telling the story of what has been published. It involves selection, interpretation, comparison, synthesis, and argument. And evidence synthesis is not just summarizing. It depends on method, appraisal, inclusion and exclusion decisions, and transparent documentation of what was done. AI may assist parts of those workflows, but it does not remove the need for people to build expert search practices, disciplinary understanding, and critical appraisal. This is why claims that AI can independently conduct systematic reviews need to be contested. At Deakin, the response has been to build from principles. That matters because AI environments move quickly. Tool-specific advice can date quickly, and researchers often face situations where the answer is not obvious. The framework gives us a shared language for decision-making, human-led decisions, evaluative judgment, safe and responsible use, and transparency. That does not mean rules or boundaries disappear. It means that the framework helps us to have better conversations about purpose, risk, accountability, and context. It moves the conversation from, is this tool allowed, to what would responsible use look like for this research task? In practice, the support has several layers. There is self-guided learning through the Deakin AI Hub and research-facing guides, including responsible use of AI in research. There are AI evaluations, which help researchers and staff think critically about their tools, their strengths, limitations, and suitability for particular tasks. There are workshops, recordings, and modules that build capability. There are librarian contact points, consultations, and conversations where questions are often very contextual. And there is more embedded expert support through literature searching and evidence synthesis services, where librarian expertise contributes directly to complex research workflows. The important point is that these are not separate fragments. Together, they form practical guidance for the researchers in an AI-impacted environment. Let's take a closer look at what these look like. The Deakin AI Hub supports staff and students to engage with AI in ways that are aligned with the university's principles. Resources and events programs have been developed for both staff and students. These include researcher-focused workshops, workshops on using AI in literature reviews, as well as material covering AI basics, AI limitations, and AI prompts. This is a growing resource in a changing environment. We see more questions about AI at our service points. We observe the changing information-seeking behaviours in our researchers. We respond to the integration of AI functionality in our library databases and platforms. We develop new resources and workshops. We take a continuous improvement approach to respond to the changing needs of our students and researchers. And in developing content, we continue to develop our own knowledge and skills. The Responsible Use in Research Guide supports researchers to identify responsible use of AI across the research lifecycle. It provides practical suggestions alongside hypothetical case scenarios to help researchers work through real decisions about AI use in context. The hypothetical scenarios provide both exemplars and cautionary tales with a helpful set of recommendations. The principles of the Australian Code of Responsible Conduct for Research are deeply embedded in the guide. To develop the guide, we collaborated extensively with Research Integrity and others across the university. We continue to connect and we revise. As policies and guidelines continue to emerge, we update our hypotheticals and recommended actions. AI evaluations are grounded in library science, library practice, and Deakin's AI framework and principles, providing a structured approach to assessing AI tools. Evaluations are conducted for AI functions within our library platforms and databases. They are also developed for premium commercial tools. We know our researchers are engaging with these tools, so we meet them where they are. The evaluations provide space to pause, to consider reward and to consider risk, to support decision making. These evaluations are designed as advice, not endorsement. As these evaluations are created, they also serve as capability development for our staff across the library. They provide opportunity and focus to explore and evaluate AI tools in the library context. They provide content to connect with our researchers and students in workshops and consultations, and they build evaluative judgment in our staff and in our community. One thing we want to call out is that guidance is not only what we write down, it is also what we make visible. Libraries can lead through visible action, making guidance visible, making evaluation visible, making responsible use visible, and sharing what we are learning as the environment changes. That includes our own practice. We use Deakin-endorsed AI tools to help shape this talk for discussion, provocations, idea generation, structure, and some drafting support. We are saying that openly because transparency is part of responsible use. But the point is not simply AI helped us make slides. The point is that visible, principled practice helps make AI use discussable, accountable, and learnable. And because we used AI in preparing this talk, we also want to be clear about what stayed human-led. Kat and I both use generative AI chat tools to shape our individual first drafts. We use them to test ideas, ask questions, develop structure, and work through possible wording. That was useful, but it also produced two individually shaped starting points. Each draft reflected the questions we had asked, the emphasis we brought, and the parts we accepted, changed, or rejected. The work then had to come back to us. It came back to sitting down together, comparing the drafts, testing the argument, reshaping the flow, rewriting sections, and deciding what this talk was actually going to say. The argument is ours, the interpretation is ours, the framing is ours, the final decisions are ours, the responsibility is ours. That distinction matters for researchers too. AI can support parts of a workflow, but it does not take responsibility for the research, the method, the findings, the claims, or the decisions made from those claims. So this is not just a disclosure, it is a small example of the same principle we are asking researchers to apply. Let's return to the researcher who came to the library asking, what tool should I use? The strongest outcome is not just that they live with a tool name, they live with a better way to decide. They understand more about purpose, risk, transparency, and responsibility. They have better questions to ask of a tool. They know what might need checking or documenting. They have a clearer sense of when AI can assist and when human expertise is needed. That is more valuable than a simple tool recommendation because it builds the researcher's own capability. This is the role we want to call out clearly. Libraries do not need to know every AI tool to support research as well. That's not where our value sits. Our expertise is in the information ecosystem, how information is created, organised, accessed, evaluated, interpreted and used. We bring expertise in searching, evaluation and appraisal. We bring ethical reflection. We bring experience in building research capability. In AI environments, that expertise helps researchers make responsible choices. It helps them to connect tool use to research purpose, evidence quality, information integrity, transparency and accountability. That is a strong role. It is also a practical one. Our position is not that libraries know AI better than everyone else. It is that AI is reshaping research practice in areas where libraries already have deep, relevant expertise. Researchers need support to navigate the information ecosystem, relevant tools, and associated uncertainty, risk, and responsibility. Libraries have the skills to contribute. We have the responsibility to contribute. Libraries should be shaping this space, not standing at the edges of it. And over for questions.
Thank you so much, Fiona. I really loved how you framed that around building on existing library strengths and then sort of adapting them for this area. So great talk. Thank you. So we do have a few questions. The first one starts as a comment, turns into a question. You've kind of answered it, but you might want to add a bit to it. So it says, so true about the researchers' conundrums. There is FOMO, and then there is wanting to do the right things. Does Deakin recommend enterprise tools in preference to all the other tools out there?
Yes, there are a couple of enterprise tools, and there are certain tools that should be completely avoided. But yeah, it is about the endorsed tools, but that's also still an environment that is growing and changing. And until we got access to our GEM, our chatbot, at the beginning of this year, so there's still a lot of development, and that tool itself has been is still undergoing change and development as well. So, short answer, yes, we do recommend the endorsed tools, but they are relatively limited at this point.
Sure, I think that's probably true for all of us. What about systematic reviews? So you mentioned that fully AI systematic reviews should be contested. Do you think a time will come where AI will be more accepted in the review process, and will it be more trusted?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There is a lot of work going on in that space with the RAISE guidelines and the work being done through Cochrane and JBI and Campbell and the Environment Group as well. So there's a number of the major bodies doing a lot of work with AI methods and working out what is tolerable and at what point is it okay, because there's always going to be unknowns with the black box of how AI works. To some extent, I think that there's almost we may get to the point where there's almost a responsibility to use AI for efficiencies with translating research into practice, just because of the sheer volume and scope of it. But there are the tensions that I was talking about earlier. One of the tensions that I see is researchers desperately wanting to use AI because they can see the efficiencies for extracting data from papers, but obviously there's considerable issues with copyright and licensing with that. So until there's broader level systemic change around that, and with that brings other challenges and other issues. So, solve one problem, create another one. I think that there is going to be more and more use of AI in systematic reviews. I think overseas, there's going to be more acceptance before there is in Australia. But ultimately, there will always, for the foreseeable future anyway, have to be some human element to it.
Yeah, so it won't be the first time we're looking to see what happens overseas before we start adopting things here. Okay, I have another question here which says, as this work evolves, how are you deciding what belongs in scalable self-guided guidance versus what really needs consultation or embedded support?
Okay. So, all right. So I think what the person is asking is what we would include in our classes versus what
or
we
maybe
would deal with.
Do you have a clear sense of those things that really require some human intervention in the support, or versus that which might just be self-help? You can put it in a study guide somewhere and that's sufficient.
Yeah, okay. I think we will continue to use a combination of different techniques to provide support. So sometimes you get the question in front of you. It might be the question that's asked at the end of the workshop. It might be the question at the service point. We would use aspects of those to help inform the development of our workshops. So that's work that we're actually currently doing at the moment. We were noting a trend in a certain type of question coming through at the end of workshops, and it didn't seem to matter how we framed the content of the workshop. We were still getting questions about tools and just getting that, building that confidence in researchers to take that principled approach. So I think it's more about the scalability of things in terms of learning what we can from the individual questions, but rolling it out. So it's never about just putting something out there and leaving people on their own. It's a combination of different support to help build this change.
Yeah, well, that was a really nice circular direction back to what librarians do really well. So I think we're good at evaluating that sort of thing. So just we're on time. So there's one more question which I'll get you to answer online, but thank you so much, Fiona.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is from UTS, potentially one of my favourite UTS colleagues, actually. So I would like to introduce Anastasios Papaioannou from UTS. Are you there, Anastasios?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ria. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, that's a good saying to say that we're working very closely together on so many things. So let me share my screen and then I can share my presentation. So let me put this on the side. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the chance to talk about what we're doing here at UTS. My name is Anastasios. I'm coming from a research background, and at UTS, I'm managing the e-research platforms and services. And today, I'm going to talk a bit more how UTS is navigating the AI in the research domain. So before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm presenting today, who are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present. For people who might not know, we're going in a different direction in this presentation. E-research is all about enabling research through technology, and our mission is about enabling researchers and HDR students to deliver world-class research through technology. And just to give you an idea of what the platforms and services of e-research within UTS, we're managing different platforms and services from research computing, all this high performance computing, to research data management and research data storage, running a big scale digital research skills training program, providing advisory and research support. We're providing access to and advice to surveying tools for research, and we're leading the adoption of AI in research at UTS. So it's a quite wide portfolio, but let's delve into the details. So let's go a step back and discuss a bit about the evolution of AI so that people can understand a bit more on that front. I'm coming from that background, so I'm happy to share a bit more. So here is a quick journey into all the AI sphere. So AI is nothing new. A lot of people use it for many, many years, decades, and we never had issues actually with that because when it comes to the machine learning or deep learning or some of the models, it's very clear of what's happening there and protective and secure ways of interacting. The big challenges started happening when generative AI came into the game. And you can see the little bubble there with all the generative AI. That is a tiny component there that is dominating nowadays. And as you can see here, historically, there were a few booms of AI development, and the latest one started in late 90s, and then all the huge growth after to 2010 with all the big infrastructure that could support all this generative AI. So why now? How come we are so engaged through AI nowadays? So just to give you an idea, before all this generative AI boom, data science or the people who wanted to work on this space, they needed a unique skill set of computer science or IT skills, plus really good maths and statistics background, plus also the domain expertise. So people were looking for unicorns in general. And this made it very hard for people to keep progressing it and interact and making sure that they're doing things properly. So generative AI came, and the benefits were three aspects. Accessibility. So now anybody can interact using natural language and communicate with AI. Accuracy and insight. So they're keep developing the models so that they're keep pushing the barriers of what is possible. And the scaling. So now data from organizations are embedded into the AI. You can ask questions about your own data, your massive databases. So it makes it easier to interact and find answers. Correct or not, that's a different debate. Okay, let's quickly talk about some of the challenges, or many of the challenges that are happening with this area. So still, even now, like generative AI becomes this. So you have input where you're training models. Nobody knows what's going on there. It's super complicated, super complex to trace exactly what's going on. And then you have a response. So the responsibility relies on the people on the output to understand if whatever produced from there is accurate or not. And these are, in my opinion, the four key challenges that we face at the moment with generative AI. Ethics, trust, and privacy. So there is concerns around data misuse, surveillance, consent, like transparency of the models, accountability, and fairness. There is also like a bias and validity. So all these algorithms and the generative AI models have been trained and inherit all the biases from the training data, which might produce a lot of unfairness and inaccurate outcomes. And transparency also is part of that. Security and policy. So all these AI systems, they introduce new vulnerabilities into systems and all the manipulation of the data and what they can do or what they cannot. And of course, the big environmental impact. So they need a huge amount of resources and energy to produce and keep operating. So what's happening so far? So one of the key themes is that every organization, every company in the world, they're trying to invest in AI because they think that suddenly is going to increase productivity magically. And then reality hits. So a lot of articles, a lot of studies, productivity isn't just doing things faster, data is the hard work, AI can be slow and expensive. Is it actually working? Here is a link to one of the studies last year from MIT. Three key points: 30 to 40 billion dollars invested in GenAI, and surprisingly, 95% of the organizations are getting zero return. So although many people claim that they can use ChatGPT or Copilot now for enterprise, and is widely adopted, only individual productivity has been discovered, but it hasn't been translated into bigger outcomes. And then most of the tools, they are failing in piloting stage. Very few are making it to a production or an enterprise level stage. And on top of that, since we talked about AI slop, this is something that is dominating as well as part of one of the biggest challenges that's happening in the AI space. And more, actually. You can challenge the training models, to feed them specific training data, and then they're absolutely useless. And then you can also poison them. As you can see here quickly, you add 300 documents that they're irrelevant just to poison the model. Suddenly the model is breaking. So there are a lot of questions around what's happening with generative AI and a lot of challenges that we need to take into account when we strategize. So what have we done at UTS? So we created a framework so that we can work holistically in so many key areas. So capability and skills development so that we can upskill the people and know how to use it responsibly. Responsible AI and governance. Safe Gen AI tools experimentation and adoption so that we can do it and enable people to do it safely. An AI survey that I'll talk about adoption and maturity insights so that we understand what people want and what is their view on AI. Infrastructure, and then collaboration and collective innovation. And all this is working all together. You cannot isolate one aspect and you think that is going to work. We need to work across all these different areas. So let's delve into the different areas step by step. So capability and skills development, what we have done is we developed an AI and research hub where it's a centralized location for researchers and HDR students to find any topics and any guidance and any resources related to AI for research. We also introduced 2 training courses, hands-on and instructor-led. People with research background are delivering these training courses, and it goes through the research life cycle and is introducing actually how to properly use these tools for your research. And it comes through introductory and also like to an intermediate level, sorry. And there are many communities at UTS where we're trying to engage actively and provide insights around like the responsible use, give updates, and making sure that we're connected with what we're introducing and what is fed to the whole community at UTS. Responsible AI and governance. So one of the things that was developed here is also like some specific use of AI in research guidelines. Every university has a policy on AI, every university has procedures on AI, but we thought like, let's put joint forces. And it was a collaboration between research, the library, the data analytics and insights unit, the graduate research school, research office, and representatives from academics. So it was a collective approach in order to go again through the life cycle and provide some ways and guidelines for responsible use of AI. And actually now we're trying to establish the same working group so that we can review them after 1 year. We're providing also like support and advice. We have different groups and different areas where they're providing different advices on AI in research and how to properly use it. And the AI and Research Hub also like works as a place where people can find all the relevant policies, procedures, and guidelines. We have actually, and we're releasing soon, guidance on available and commonly used AI tools because a lot of universities are a bit reluctant to see that most people are using everything, and we wanted to take an approach where we can release guidance even on tools that they're not enterprise so that people know what are the risks, what are the considerations. And of course, the next step is also like a lot of people buying their own AI tools. Can we have guidelines for them so that we can help them with the process of procuring them properly? Safe GenAI tools experimentation and adoption. This is a big topic at the moment because every university is providing enterprise access to Copilot. But as you might know, and as everybody knows, like researchers want to use so many different AI tools. So we spent some time with a group of people across different units to come up with a framework so that it's a structured way of piloting. So instead of people buying individual licenses, can we collectively understand what are the needs, go through a structured process, and then after we evaluate what AI tool, for example, one of the tools that we are evaluate, actually some of the tools is Alissa and Claude. So people want to use Alissa for literature review, people want to use Claude for coding and analysis. So the process, where we have a structured process that now we are onboarding these kind of tools so that we can do a proper evaluation, then we can do a training before people start using them, so that they're aware of risks, challenges, and benefits, and then do an ongoing evaluation of check-ins, like a longitudinal study every 4 months, so that we can understand benefits and challenges, so that the final recommendation before we reject or approve for enterprise is a data-driven and evidence-based approach. AI adoption and maturity insight. So one of the things that strikes me a lot is that a lot of things are speculative at the moment. Like, so a lot of people are guessing what we should do and what the strategy should be. And we forget that we should ask the people. So after a long time, we designed a university-wide AI survey that is ready. And hopefully in the next few weeks or months, is going to be distributed across the whole university to all UTS researchers and HDR students to understand what is their view, what is their view on AI, what are their concerns, some of the challenges, the maturity of the university, adoption patterns, what tools they use, how they're using them, so that we can start strategizing more carefully and based on what needs are coming from the community. Also, like we're strategizing on infrastructure because it's a big thing on using AI. A lot of academics and their students want to use it for their research. So we have different strategies and exploring safe ways of experimenting with all these tools. And last bit, this is the best time actually for collaboration. So it's very important that we join forces and we don't replicate what we're currently doing. So we're trying to establish some collaborations with, at the moment, we have an active collaboration with the University of Melbourne and University of Sydney in this area where we can share and we can help each other. This way, like we are not spending the same amount of time for each area, each of us. So, and we're trying to collectively like engage with the community across Australia and New Zealand to like have more people joining this collaborative effort to adopt and tackle all these challenges. So to wrap up my presentation, I'll finish with the question. How do we go from scattered experimentation to real value? And that's one of the challenges at the moment. Like we see a lot of scattered people using different ways and different tools and different AI use cases, but how do we go to value realization? And that's one of the challenges that nobody has solved yet. And one of the things that Ria might understand and endorse a lot is that the biggest challenge at the moment is that we don't pay attention to the data as well. Like a lot of things are happening around AI, but data governance and data management is key to everything that we do as universities. And as I'm going to close with this message, collaboration and national coordination is key to success. We cannot individual universities start tackling all these things. We need to start working all together in this area. This way we can keep up with the pace and also work all together to come up with all these solutions that they can work across Australia. And if you want to get in touch, here is my email. And happy to share any of the initiatives that we're doing, any of the guidelines. I'm happy to open them, to share them openly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anastasios. Fantastic wrap up of what's happening here at UTS. So thank you for that. There are a few questions here. One of them is actually sort of touching on some of the research that you shared earlier, but it says there was an interesting article recently about AI freeing up time, but individuals just end up squeezing in even more work. Would you agree with this premise?
100%. Productivity is not about doing more within the time frame that you are having as part of your work. That's nothing to do about productivity, and that's the key false perspective that is organizations trying to bring. So productivity is about like squeezing the time and free up the time to do nothing else, like actually like go forward in a modern society where we have more time to do other things. But this is a false perspective, like we're trying to squeeze things. And the other thing is also the increased productivity of one person most of the times means the decreased productivity of another person who needs to review an AI generated thing. So that's why it's hard to understand the benefits.
That's right. And as our keynote speaker, Adrian, said this morning, he'd really like to be spending his time doing other research, but here we are. Yeah, anyway. Here's another question for you. When you think about desired outcomes in this space, what would tell you that UTS's approach is actually working for researchers and support staff?
Well, I can answer that after the AI survey, when we're going to hear from the people actually how they feel, because the most important thing is for people to feel supported, making sure that the AI use cases are safely and responsibly used, and we're helping them to enable their research, but also doing it in a safe and responsive way. So the biggest outcome would be actually for AI to become another tool that is managed properly and under governance and under proper guardrails instead of people experimenting and sharing insights like based on their own perspectives. So that would be a key outcome, but hopefully the AI survey will be quite useful to demonstrate some of the insights.
Yeah, for sure. I very much know that in research support, researchers really appreciate having the chance to share their own views of what's happening. So yeah, I'm looking forward to those survey results too. One more question here. Oh no, actually another one's just appeared. So do concerns about environmental impacts increase mistrust in AI?
Definitely. And I think that's one of the other things that we're going to see a lot in the survey, because one of the questions is about that. So there is a constant increasing concern on the impact of the use, even of my Copilot utilization of tokens, if I keep interacting with it, all the way to going to infrastructure that is massively consuming energy. And I know that because we're managing the research computing infrastructure at UTA. So we're actively talking to data centers where we're trying to bring more infrastructure because academics need more powerful infrastructure to run their models. So it's a constant concern, and it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to play in their views in the near future.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, last question. Does UTS have any guidelines on the use of agentic AI tools in research?
Not about agenting AI, but we're trying the revision that's going to happen now about the use of AI guidelines in research. We're going to include it as well. So that's going to be the first pass of including agenting AI as part of the discussion.
Okay, so watch this space. Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Anastasios. That's fantastic. And that closes this little bracket of sessions. So we're actually going to take a 5-minute break now. Make sure you go and have a stretch, and we'll see you back here at 2:25. Thank you. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I'm just about to introduce our final speaker for the day, which is Titus Tang from Monash University. So this presentation will go for 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for 5 minutes of Q&A at the end. So thank you, Titus.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ria, for the intro. Just sharing my screen here. All right. So, hello, today I want to point out that AI is no longer just a chatbot, and I also want to talk about how to use AI productively. However, I'm not going to answer that question directly because you can get a quick answer with just a Google or AI search. Instead, I think that you or the researcher that you support are sophisticated users of AI. And as such, it's worthwhile having a more sophisticated understanding of how AI works inside that black box, so that you can make better informed choices when working with AI. So today I'm going to take a little bit of a detour to look at the state of AI in 2026 and talk about how we can frame our mindset when thinking about AI use. Now, I want to be clear that I'm aware about the various discussions around how much AI we should use in research. I don't think that the answer is a clear yes or a no. I think it's somewhere in between. So today I want to talk about AI as a tool. And of course, there are millions of ways to use a tool right and millions of ways to use a tool poorly. So before I go right in, let's narrow the scope a bit because there's just so much to talk about AI. So what I have here listed are some of the various forms of data types that AIs can ingest and compute about. Today, I'm going to zoom in on large language models because these are the kinds of AI that perhaps we are all most familiar with. If you ever use a chatbot in recent days, you have most likely interacted with a large language model. But regardless, many of the points that I cover today are applicable to any forms of AI, language or not. So let me start with a simple question around how a language model works, because I think this is critical in our understanding around what AI can do and what it is weak at. So to put it very simply, and to summarize pretty much the entire industry in a couple of sentences, a large language model simply predicts the most likely next word given a sequence of prior words. So for example, here I have 3 words: the earth revolves. If I take those 3 words, pass it into the model, it looks at all possible words and predicts the most likely next word. So let's say the next word is around. We take that output, we put it back into this input, add it to the previous words, and then pass all of that back into the model as a new updated input. And we repeat that process again and again and again for every single word in the output sequence. So this process is called autoregressive decoding. It's called autoregressive because its own prediction is used to inform its input to make the next prediction. So you might be wondering, how does such a simple mechanism result in the so-called intelligent behavior that we see in AI these days? And I think that really is the result of taking really, really large mathematical models in the order of, say, 1 trillion parameters large, and training them on humongous amounts of data using clever and complex algorithms and training techniques. There's a lot to go into on that, but I think that's a story for another day. Here are some of the major AI or large language model providers out there in the world today. This is not an exhaustive list. You might be familiar with some of these names, and some of these names might be new to you. OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, arguably the first large-scale and openly accepted chatbot. We have Claude by Anthropic, we have Gemini by Google, we have DeepSeek, Qwen by Alibaba, Kimi by Moonshot AI, and many more actually. I would guess there'll be about a dozen or so AI providers out there who provide state-of-the-art models or any models that are close to state-of-the-art. So a point of potential interest here is how these AI companies are positioning themselves commercially. So in the top row, we have companies that were early to the race and are leading the pack in terms of raw model performance. However, they tend to be a little bit more expensive relatively. In the bottom row, we have companies that have generally taken a slightly different approach. They have chosen to release even their best models for free for anyone to use. However, running these models, these large, massive models, trillions of parameters large on local hardware is generally not a trivial problem to solve. So these companies host and run their own models on your behalf, essentially offering compute as a service. So here is a list from the artificial analysis website, a benchmarking service on AI models that are publicly available. Those in black show the proprietary models, which are hidden behind a paywall. Those in blue refer to models that you could pay to use, or you could literally download those open source or open weights models to run on your local hardware, if you have the appropriate hardware. And we can see that these open source models are not too far from the state of the arts, trailing them by about maybe 10 to 15% on average. Here is another chart showing a similar thing, but on the x-axis we have the cost to run these models, and in this case we are running it on a benchmark of tasks to measure its performance and also cost required to complete that benchmark. And on the vertical axis we have the performance of the model. So just to give an example, right? Not all models are created equal. On the right here in top quadrant, we have Claude Sonnet, which is a default model for a lot of Anthropic's AI services. And it takes about $4,000 to run this benchmark at a performance about maybe 55 units. Comparatively, we have DeepSeek over here at about the same level of performance, but costing around $256, about a 16-fold reduction in cost to complete the same benchmark. Now, I want to be clear here that I'm not for or against any company over the other. And I'm certainly not necessarily promoting, say, Claude or Anthropic over DeepSeek or vice versa. I think, first of all, that we should not judge AI just by its performance alone. Whenever we want to use AI, we have to think about not just performance and not just cost, but also, for example, security and privacy issues around how these companies manage their data, about organizational constraints around whether you are being supported in using these kinds of tools. But at the end of the day, my point here is that there are really a lot of options out there. And if you start searching, you realize that you're spoiled for choice. So going back to these models, let's ask what can they do, right? And so these are large language models. So clearly they are able to read and write text that you provide to them or receive from them. These models have been trained to reason logically in some sense. They can answer questions that you ask. They can provide advice. They can help you design a plan, break a problem down into small steps, and to advise how you can go around executing that plan. So if you look at this list, you will see that all of these tasks, even though impressive, really relates to reading and writing in language, right? And that is a good set of skills to have, but it's still very limited because these models can only read and write and not do anything else. So they can't, for example, inspect the world. They don't have sensors attached to them to be able to see or listen to what's happening in the world. It is unable to update its knowledge. Once a model is trained and deployed into the real world, it's not able to learn new things. It is unable to take an action because it is not connected to any actuators in the world. It is not connected to your computer. It's not connected to a mouse or a keyboard or anything like that. It is unable to save anything to memory, even though you might tell it something. It doesn't know how to remember it by itself. And very crucially, it is unable to wake itself up later to complete a task at a later time. If you think about a person who holds these traits, that they are able to do everything on the left and not everything on the right, well, this is going to be a very wise or very intelligent person, but also a person that's very limited in what they can do in the real world. So we need tools that help support these large language models in interacting with the world. And that is where the model harness comes in. The model harness is simply a software environment, a wrapper around large language models, where the large language model serves as the brain, the intelligence of the system, and the harness serves as the body, the parts of the system that allows the system as a whole to interact with the rest of the world. So for example, some components in this system could include, say, memory management, figuring out what facts are worth remembering, to then store that memory, and to then be able to retrieve it at the relevant times in the future. We have the concepts of skills. These are written documents, often in just plain language, where these large language models can refer to if they ever needed to complete a complex task. We have, say, tool use, such as reading and writing to files, computer use, such as navigating a operating system, mouse and keyboard actions, the ability to search the web, the ability to execute code, and so on and so forth. And very importantly, we need the ability to act in a loop of planning, figuring out what to do, acting, taking those actions and interacting with the world, and then observing the outcomes of those actions to be able to then plan the next step. So when you put all or many of these components together inside a single harness and accompanied by a decent performing large language model, we would have what we call these days as an agent. So whenever you talk about agentic AI, really this is what we are referring to. So conclusion number one for today is just me pointing out the fact that AI is no longer just chat. AI is no longer just chat GPT. AI really covers not just large language models, but also the harness that they are in. So whenever we talk about using AI, think in terms of not just chat and large language models, but about the entire software ecosystem that enables AI to perform what it can do. And when you place the right harness with the right intelligence, then AI can do almost anything in the digital world right now. Which kind of, when I say almost anything, that kind of brings me to my second point today, which is that software development is your new superpower. So what do I mean by that? Well, what is software development? It is in large part writing code. Computer code is essentially a form of a language. But hey, guess what? AI, large language models, are really good at generating language. So if you're able to control AI that is able to write code, and writing code forms the foundation of the digital world, then you pretty much have the digital world at your fingertips. So how good is AI these days when it comes to writing code? I'm an AI engineer, and a large part of my job revolves around writing code, building AI, invoking AI, and so on. And I've been writing code since my undergraduate days, close to perhaps 20 years ago, I think. It's a bit showing of my age. And I'm willing to declare today, publicly, that AI, the best AI agents out there, are today better at me at writing code. So AI is better at writing code. It is able to do so in more languages. It is able to write code at incredible speeds. It is less prone to errors than me. It is better at holding context across thousands of lines of code, across multiple files, across large projects. And it is better at not forgetting tiny little tasks here and there that I have dropped off my list because I've been focusing on the main goals. So in a nutshell, I'm happy to admit that AI is the better programmer today. However, that does not mean that my job is completely redundant or really any software programmer's job is redundant, because humans still hold an edge across many different tasks. First of all, humans understand the product. They know how the product is meant to be built. They know who is going to use it and how it's going to be used. And to be able to break that concept down into actionable steps is still at the moment very largely a human trait. Humans are still better at seeing the bigger picture and having flexible thinking. So for example, if you were to throw 10 tasks to an AI, that AI, and assuming you do it well and the AI is well performing, that AI is going to complete those tasks and only those 10 tasks strictly. Or you could provide an AI with one really complex task and we'll put all effort and all compute in to find a solution, however complex, to solve that problem. However, we have the advantage that we are able to take a step back, zoom out, look at the bigger picture, and say, hey, we have 10 tasks here that we need to solve. Do we really need to solve these problems? Can the project or the problem be framed in a different way such that we solve a slightly different problem that is more manageable? Is the way that we are solving problems efficient? And are there any other flexible ways of thinking we can adopt to reduce this problem down into smaller components that are more manageable? I think that at the moment, that is still very largely a human trait, at least for now. So I would say that even though AI is the better programmer, humans, I think, are still the better architects and perhaps the better managers. So regardless, I think the advances in AI, and especially in software development, means that the economics around writing code has changed significantly. In 2025 and before, you would have a product manager that defined the product, laid down the specifications around how to build this product, and then pass it on to a team of software developers to spend the time banging at the keyboard, writing down complex code to execute this vision. In 2026, and I say 2026 not because we happen to be in 2026, really this turning point where AI has gotten just good enough to outcompete the average programmer or even top programmers really happened towards the end of 2025 and early 2026. So it is a relatively new phenomenon. But in 2026, it is possible that that whole concept of a product manager managing a team of software developers is, in a sense, outdated, and it just becomes you and your AI coding agent. And that goes back to my title of this section today, that software development is now your superpower. Now, I want to be clear here, not to set expectations too high, that this AI coding agent can't solve all your problems, right? Yes, you have a team of expert software developers now at your disposal for a few tens of dollars a month, but these are very narrow intelligences. You cannot build, or at least I believe that you can't, build a $100 million company just using AI coding agents. You need experienced software developers. You can't build, for example, you can't build and scale, say, for example, an app that has millions of users without human knowledge, at least for now. But if you have, say, a website that your research team wants to build with certain custom features, or say you have a mobile app that you want to create for your friends or family or for yourself as a hobby, or you have a certain data processing script that you always wanted to implement, but just never had a chance to learn how to code, or a task to automate, well, I'll tell you now that the barrier to entry has lowered so much that all of this is now feasible. I'm not saying that it is easy, but it is now feasible. Also, it's not all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to getting AI to write code for you. As I said before, AI coding agents are a very narrow form of intelligences that are really good at a very specific task. It is a key task, but it's still a very specific task of writing code. And if you're removing the rest of the team, and you're the only one managing that agent, then you need to be a generalist. You need to design the product. You need to work with the agent and to specify what you want clearly to the agent. Most failures that I see when it comes to using agents like this are because of the lack of specification around what you want. You need to be able to handle agent failures when the agent makes a mistake. You need to understand what the agent does. Otherwise, you just end up with, to quote a lot of the speakers today, AI slop. And you need to deal with all the other issues around the life cycle of software development. So yes, you have a new superpower, but it does come with caveats. So conclusion number 2, because of AI's ability to write computer code so well and so quickly, I think like software is now an abundant resource. So use it or get left behind. Now, if you are interested to start using and adopting various AI tools out there, here are some of my personal thoughts and ideas around how you could board the so-called AI bullet train. Number 1 is that AI really is becoming a commodity. Just like you flip a switch and the light turns on, you turn on a tap and water flows. I believe even now and perhaps in the near future that you just click a button on the mouse and you would have AI compute running through your scripts or your codes or whatever it is. So there's no such thing as a best provider. The providers with the highest performing models change month to month. It's a fierce competition in the industry. So don't be loyal to a single provider. And because the technology is updating so fast, at least for now, you need to build with the future in mind, because whatever is cutting edge now will become commonplace in the next 6 months. There is also a learning curve. As I said before, using the example of getting AI agents to code, yes, it is one thing asking them to write code, but it's another thing understanding the code that they have written and how you could utilize it for your use case. So there is always a learning curve, although that learning curve has shrunk significantly, but you still need to be able to be willing to learn. And one good way that I personally find very useful is to use AI to learn about what you want it to do, at least initially. If you have no idea about a certain topic, get AI to answer your broad questions, develop an initial understanding of the space such that you're able to ask more nuanced questions, and then take that understanding towards a more rigorous source of information to verify your understanding and to solidify the approach that you want to adopt in implementing your plan. And last but not least, don't get too comfortable. The AI space is changing very fast. The best tools today will be outdated in a few months. So you need to be able to update yourself, update your knowledge, and to be able to adapt to the new tools that keep sprouting up like mushrooms everywhere. And I find that one way to really help in this process of fast updating and adapting is to be genuinely curious about the technologies and how you could utilize them for your benefit or for the benefit of society. So AI is the last conclusion for the day. AI is a fast-moving space. Change really is the only constant here in this space, at least for now, while the industry goes through this growth spurt. And so really there is no best way of doing things in any particular situation. So if you were hoping today for me to provide hard, concrete tips about, yes, you should do this or not that, unfortunately to disappoint you, but that is the nature of the beast right now. So really the only constant advice that I can give is that we have to be able to continuously adapt and learn as this industry evolves. One last side note before I finish up is around the questions of sensitive data. So we are all working with researchers who in many situations have sensitive data that they cannot release outside of the secure environment that they work in. And so the question is, how do I apply AI to this sensitive data without compromising on security and privacy? So I like to use this little infographic on the left here. I'm sure you have heard of this seen this Venn diagram before. So with most things in life, you have the option of it being fast, good, or cheap. Choose two, but not all at once. So I think that really is the compromise they have to make, the trade-off that we have to make when making these decisions. In this case, I'm going to replace fast with secure. So secure, good, and cheap, choose two. And I say that because really, if you really want state-of-the-art proprietary models, those models are hidden behind a paywall, hosted on servers perhaps outside of the country. And oftentimes sensitive data needs to be processed locally. And if you want to run things locally, you would need open weights, open source, local models. So the options generally fall into one of these three categories. Either you send your data to external AI providers, you buy expensive hardware to run decent, good models. So in my list of models from before, the top open source models are about 10 to 15% lagging behind state of the art, which is roughly 6 months. But really, this is perhaps my least recommended option because hardware really, really is expensive to run these models. And the usual solution is to run with small models that might do the job. And to be clear, I don't want to discount small models because small models do not necessarily mean insufficient performance, right? We don't always need the top models, the state of the art to run every single task that we want to do. It is oftentimes very economical to split tasks by difficulty hierarchy and to route them to different model sizes based on the difficulty of the task. All right, that's all for my ramble today. If you have any questions that I am unable to address in the chat in the limited time that we have, feel free to drop me an email at titus.tang@monash.edu, and I'm happy to answer your questions. So over to you, Ria, and happy to answer questions now.
Great. Thank you so much, Titus. That was a fascinating talk for someone who's even wary of imagining that software development could be within my reach. I'm now potentially even a little bit curious about it. So we do have a few questions here. I will say some of them are sort of probably were asked early and they've sort of been answered as you've been speaking, but you might want to expand on them a little bit. So okay, so there's one here that says, your explanation of how LLMs work is clear. Do you think perhaps many of us don't know the basics of how AI tools are working in order to confidently answer researchers' questions?
I would say that having an understanding of how things work is really helpful in understanding the limitations. So in a sense, I would say yes to that question almost all the time. One thing I would say around this question is that I always say to people trying to understand AI, don't think of AI as intelligences, think of AI as a machine. Because when you think of AI as intelligences, you start to put for the lack of a better word, put faith in them in making the right decisions. And that is not the case. AI literally is a mathematical function, a piece of computer code that you run through hardware, you run through silicon. And so, treat it like a machine, always be careful of its output, verify it with human thought, and have an understanding of how it works, because that helps you knowing how to use this machine.
That's good. Yep. Okay. So next question here. With the US effectively banning international use of Anthropic's latest models, what are the potential ramifications for Australian universities relying on overseas LLMs?
I'm a fan of open source models, and I think it's a good thing that these models are not too far behind state of the art. So there are, of course, use cases where you really need the best models possible to solve the really complex cutting edge science that you're doing. But I think for a majority of cases, these open source models are sufficient. And really, I think the best open source models today lag behind the best proprietary models by about 6 months. So if you think it's not good enough, wait 6 months and it will be good enough, right? So I think that it's a bit concerning that a single government can control the technologies that we have access to as a society. But at the same time, I'm not too worried for day-to-day tasks because we do have a lot of options.
Okay, so just broad range of options out there and got to make sure we consider all of them. Yeah. Okay, so this one harks back to Adrian Barnett's keynote today. How do we stop researchers from leaving it all to AI, leaving the loop, so to speak? So you talked about us having to remain continuously adapt and learn. Is there anything else you'd suggest?
I think that's a tricky problem for me to answer, and perhaps even for humanity to answer. We have lost a lot of skills over hundreds of years with the introduction of various forms of technologies. For example, just mental arithmetic, right? So I think no doubt that we will continue to lose some skills with the introduction of AI. How that pans out in the decades to come, I'm not in the position to make predictions like that. Really, at this stage, because we are in a fast evolving industry with so much changes happening, I think the only thing to say is to just be vigilant, stay on your toes, try to stick to common sense and human and reasonable thinking. But really, yes, I don't think there's much more advice I can give around this question.
Well, this next question actually sort of flips it in a way. It says, if AI is getting better at coding, holding context, and working across languages, what are the most important human skills to keep developing?
Yeah. So I think using that software analogy, I think we are going to become managers of AI. So we're going to have various AI agents, so to speak, working below us, dealing with all the menial tasks that we're not so keen on working ourselves. And so as such, it is important to, first of all, like I said before, understand how your minions are doing the task, understand their outputs, be able to critically evaluate what they are doing, and taking the bigger picture to be able to orchestrate that whole system to manage them across different agents. I think that's where we are going, and to be able to then communicate your output in a way that is trustable to another person.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think that was a fantastic, thought-provoking session for us all. So thank you very much, Titus.
Most welcome. Happy to hear.
And actually, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all of our amazing speakers and presenters today. So this AI topic is complex and fast-moving, lots for us to learn, but I think it's been really great for us to come together and think through these challenges collectively and think about what it means for the work we're all doing. So thank you to you as well, everyone who joined us today and contributed to the conversation. We had some fantastic engagement happening in the chat and in the Q&A. So as always, we'd really appreciate your feedback on this year's event. So there's going to be a link to the feedback form dropped in the chat. We really want to make sure that this event continues to serve this community as well as possible. So your input is really helpful in making sure we can do that. And of course, we'd love to see you back tomorrow for day 3, featuring our final keynote speaker, Professor Sandy O'Sullivan, on Indigenous data sovereignty and citational justice. And then, of course, we have a great mix of sessions on reporting and metrics, evidence-based practice, open publishing, connected research culture, and collaborative HDR support. So hopefully that entices you back for tomorrow. But just to finish up today, I'm going to hand over to Donna to close us out with the afternoon karakia. Thank you, Donna.
Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro. Ki runga, ki tēnā o tātou. Ki mahia te hua, mā kihi, kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te rea Māori, kia tūturu, ka whakamoa, ki tina, huie, tai kie. Thank you and see you all tomorrow.
Great work, everyone.
Indeed.
Thank you. Love
Amazing
it.
questions, Gabby. You had some really, really good ones there.
Well, I had to get my brain working, but I had a double dose of chocolate today.
Yeah.
No, it's so comforting when you see those questions start to drop in the chat.
Yeah, I know, and yeah, hopefully tomorrow. Like, I'm surprised, given the presentations today, there wasn't a lot more contribution from the audience.
I thought
But
it might have been a hot
We're just
topic.
listening.
Yeah.
yeah,
Great
yeah.
presentation,
Fine.
Fiona. I'm so sorry I didn't get that update about Cat. But your presentation was fantastic. So
Honestly,
professional.
we've jumped between both. Like we were like, we'll both do it, then it will just one of us, and then we went. And last night we were talking about both, and I was like, no, I think it's just one of us. So yeah, it was absolutely fine. Yeah,
All right. Well,
it was there in the background anyway. So